And what is interesting that in all the Mesopotamian or other stories about the Great Flood from at least this region, it is said that, okay, there was a flood. The ark went into these mountains. Either, one version it was, the famous Ararat, like in the Bible. In other, there was like a different mountain, but it went there, so very high. And then it started civilization settlements again. So even, let's be skeptical. Maybe there was no flood, no ark or something. But I think that even in these flood stories, there may be memory of people remembering that, okay, civilization started not, between the rivers as later civilizations, but it started, as we find it archaeologically, in the highlands, because it started there, and we see how crops evolved, at least in, this particular period of time, about 10,000, 9,000 BC. So maybe, even if we're skeptical that there was no flood, we see that there is a memory that, civilization, settlement started in the mountainous areas, on the highland areas, and then it went down.
I'm Rai, your Kodega, here to lead you through the shadows of the unknown. My journeys have carried me across hidden corners of the world to places steeped in wonder, whispers, and unanswered questions. Walk with me as we uncover ancient civilizations, unravel unexplained phenomena, and chase the legends that refuse to die. Welcome to Kodega's Codex of Curiosities. All right, everyone, welcome back to the show where history just gets a little bit blurry. Timelines, they start to act a little suspicious. And of course, the past just doesn't always seem to stay where we left it. And of course, tons and tons of questions. Now, today's conversation is going to be one of those where you're going to be like, what? You're going to tilt your head and say, wait a second, because we are going to be diving back into the idea that maybe history, of course, is not a straight line. Maybe it's a loop, a rhythm, a cycle, and it's one that we just keep dancing, whether we realize it or not. Also, we're going to be diving into things that, maybe history has covered up, or I wouldn't say history, maybe some historians have covered up and have disregarded certain aspects of our history. And we're going to jump right into that. Now, I'm joined by researcher, author, and returning guest, Alexander Cheskevich, whose work explores lost civilizations, ancient, that doesn't work, ancient catastrophes, and the possibility that humanity just might be living through chapters that are on repeat. Now, his book looks into myths, archaeology, and the big question, has it already happened, or has it happened before? Now, we're going to wander through, of course, we're going to go through some forgotten worlds, forgotten cultures, forgotten civilizations, and what it actually means if the past is less the past than we think. Now, before we jump into that, if you guys are enjoying these conversations with these fantastic guests that explore the edges of history, consciousness, and those strange little threads that are connecting them, make sure you guys are following the show wherever you're listening. Drop a like, leave a review, and perhaps you can share the episode. Share it on your Facebook, share it on Instagram, share it with a friend, share it with a family over dinner, whatever works. It genuinely helps the show grow, and it keeps these conversations coming and continuing this show. All right. So without further ado, let's just jump into this loop. Alexander, welcome back to the show. I am very pleased to have you back.
Thanks for having me on. Hello, everyone. Again, I've always enjoyed your shows. Last one was a banger, so I think today we'll dive into more of the biggest mysteries and, explore more of the most interesting topics.
Exactly. I would say that my show originally started that I was going to be getting into like UFOs, cryptids, and ghosts and whatnot, but it has extremely expanded. And I would definitely say like our lost history, our forgotten past is something that really resonates with me now. I think it's very important. People will always question, they're like, well, why do you think that's important? Like, we're living in the now. But it's important so in case we are repeating history, if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, that is just insanity. We need to figure out what's going on and see if we can build a different path, create a new way. And I think it's extremely important. Also, why is it all being covered up? Why is this, being brushed away and we're only being told that we're in this linear path that the academics want us to know? So, Alexander, if those people who are listening now, they haven't heard your previous episode, why don't you just give a brief introduction about yourself and also where they can find you too?
My name is Aleksander Czeszkiewicz and I'm a researcher and author from Poland. My book, my first one, is Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been, and it's mostly about lost civilizations, lost history of humanity, and cyclical time. I wrote it just at the age of 17, but it's 400 plus pages. It's not like teenage crap or something. It was before the age of AI. Right now, I'm 23 years old. I'm also a student, not only when it comes to history, but I have a little specialization in altogether ancient Middle East, including religions, different languages, and I will be starting soon learning Hebrew, ancient Greek, and stuff like that. But even before that, for many years, I've been researching all the topics, not only history, lost history, but, how the universe works, spirituality, metaphysics, consciousness. I also myself had, I could say, spiritual awakening of some sorts, going from agnostic, a little bit atheistic, into, experiencing spiritual stuff that let me know that there is much more to this world than just, matter and its interaction, just logical mind and stuff like that. So I try to explore all parts of the reality. And I think, as you've said in the beginning, that history is one of the most important ones. And, looking even at conventional history, not that old one, but just like last few hundred years, we see that the biggest thing about controlling humanity was always controlling its history. And even here in Poland, we have fascinating but also sad history when it comes to other people, other powers, foreign powers, trying to erase everything that was Polish from memory of the entire world. We were under partitions by Russia, Germany, and Austro-Hungarian Empire for 123 years. And during these times, they tried to erase everything that was Polish. It was like called Russification by the Russians, Germanization by the Germans. So you couldn't speak Polish in particular periods of this part of the history, but we prevailed. And I think that's why here in Poland, we have a little bit different mindset. If someone at the top or in the media and the television tries to tell us this is the truth, you're wrong or something like that, here in Poland, we are a little bit rebellious because we know our history, we know how hard it was in the past. So I think maybe because of that, partially, we are more inclined into what skeptics would say conspiracy theories. We are not that, easy to be manipulated and easy to believe in what is official, what is not, and, in disproving, our beliefs or even beliefs of our ancestors.
I love how you put that. And I love the history of Poland as well. And you are correct. Like, I don't want to get into any geopolitics or anything like that right now, but Poland is the safest country in all of Europe. And that's because they realize certain things and they have put their foot down because of their past history. They know how things can go. So that is the safest country in Europe, which is very surprising. And so those who are looking to go travel, hey, Poland is a safe country to go and visit. Now, you were saying that, as I stutter over my words, I seem to be doing that a lot. Our history like we're rewriting history. It's very important to know that how is that done, or like we've forgotten history or change a history. It's through story. Well, it used to be stories, but now it's through textbooks and it's through the media. And if you control both of those, you control history, really. And I've always said it takes one generation to erase history, and because what you do is you start teaching the younger generation the version of history that you want them to know. As the older generation gets older, they will die off. And this newer generation, the majority of the newer generation, will possibly believe this new written history. And it's a scary thought because, you know,
also in the modern world, they are I didn't want to interrupt you because I totally agree with you. But what I wanted to add is that the media tries to influence the younger generations that older people they are bad, they do not know things, they were taught the old stuff, so it's even getting rebellious against the older ones, and the older ones are telling their narrative about the history, and you teach the younger one a different one, and the younger is like, no, we are being taught that, so this is another mechanism.
Yeah, exactly. Turn them rebellious against us. I don't want to say us, but it turns relevant against the people who know a certain history. And that's not to say, though, that the history that I know from the history books that were written for me, of course, is a lot of it is jaded. A lot of it is fabricated. And I'm realizing that now. I'm actually coming to a realization about certain histories that it's mind-blowing. And the type of narrative that has been pushed down our throats is not true. So let's, with all that out of the way, let's get into this.
Yes, I can also say from my own experience, because again, Poland is or has been for the last few years called the safest country on earth, but we are fighting as people with the government, which in large part, I don't want again to go into politics, but very often people at the top are against, the Polish people, the just casual people. And we try our best, but it's sometimes impossible to, do our best at that. And what I wanted to say is that even, I'm young, 23 years old, but I remember at least twice the times that history books were changed during just my educational system, in the last 10 years or something, just because of, a different political party coming to power. And, it's unfortunately we're living in such times, and these were just short periods, like 4, 5, maybe 8 years of, particular people at power. So people still were knowing that things were changed. But imagining if this was over the course of 50 years or 20 years or 100 years, this could become the official narrative. And, it was like the one thing that was very important in our history then during, the next part of textbooks was, completely omitted. But it was very important to think about the Second World War and the Poles and how they were treated by the others. Or, such minor changes of different namings that were more softened. We do not call them murderers or something, but, just, small things, but step by step, I imagine that in, as I said, 20, 50 or 100 years, this could be, this could completely change our history. But also when it comes to changing our history, I think that the biggest thing, even apart from conspiracy theories, even the thing that I think every skeptic and every firm believer in the official narrative, what can change them completely, what could shatter their belief in the official narrative is how even the official narrative was changing over the last 50 years or something. And, recently as I went to the university, I started again coming back more to the, academic sources and academic knowledge. And, I was laughing very hard because, for instance, a book from 5 years ago states that anatomically modern humans, so we, not previous hominids, but we in the current form appeared about 300,000 years ago. I remember 5 years before that when I was writing my book, it was 200,000, now about 300,000. And now it even comes to this idea that we diverged from the previous hominids about 500,000 years ago, but we do not know exactly. But I also read recently a book from 2004. So about 22 years ago, not that long ago, within science, there are still textbooks from the 70s and 80s, which are very great, but from 2004. And I was laughing very hard when I read that it was said there that anatomically modern humans appeared 50,000 years ago, maximum 100,000. So we actually pushed, the boundaries of anatomically modern humans back by a few times, hundreds of thousands of years in about 20 years. So imagine right now there are plenty of, we are called conspiracy theorists by, the media, the bankers and other, big shouters on the internet. But, because we say, oh, history may be older, maybe Atlantis maybe existed and stuff like that. But who knows if in just 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, it will be just common knowledge that yes, there have been civilizations 10,000 BC and that ancient Sumer was not the first one, or maybe that even it was much older. So I think that when it comes, if we want to try to make a change actually, because, I can talk about the most extreme conspiracy theories and, plenty of people really enjoy that. Maybe I also enjoy that. But what I also want to do is, to try and, impact those people who are deeply rooted in the mainstream, not, to forcefully convince them that I'm right and they're wrong. No, it's not my, not my kind of thing. But what I want to do is to show step by step how it can be different, how we've been changing the history over the last 20, 50 or something years. And, to open them for this idea that there can be much more to our history or prehistory, that there can be much more to the universe. It's the same like when you're talking about crazy spirituality, out of body experiences, astral travel and stuff like that. If you talk like that to an atheist, he will laugh at you and he will say, oh, you're stupid, you're low IQ, primitive being believing in some kind of fantasies. But if you try, if you tell him, okay, physics says like that, and physics says that there can be much more to that. Maybe, there is something more than matter. And if you step by step, introduce this person to this world of spirituality, maybe he will start having some minor spiritual experiences like synchronicities. And then this person can be transformed and say, wait a minute, yes, there is much more. And I was wrong about my beliefs. And, I do that because I remember my own, belief system in the past. My spiritual journey was actually from agnostic, a little bit even on the atheistic side, when I was a kid. Oh, I'm not convinced by religions because then there was no spirituality. It was not like very cool. But, religion here in Poland, we are a very Catholic country. So I wasn't convinced by that. I was into science, I was learning a lot at school, I was into math. So it's very rational. And maybe there is no God. And I even, was maybe also a little bit harsh to people who believed in some kind of spirituality back then. But, step by step, parallel to my research in history, I started having synchronicities, crazy experiences in dreams, like a little bit of prophetic dreams, but not about major events, who I will marry or something. No, minor events that were just there to awaken me. And I remember it step by step. And finally, there came a time that, okay, I talked to myself, I cannot explain that in rational terms that, it's just my mind predicting the future and giving me some signs in my dream. There is something beyond rationality, beyond us humans as just, biological machines made out of meat. So, I think that the same approach should be, of course, we should be also, talking about the extreme stuff, not like ignore them at all. But I think, that the biggest impact right now can be made by step, introducing people into these ideas. That's why I always, when talking about lost history, I always talk about, the scientific mainstream perspective, how it has been, changed over the years and how it can change in the future.
Oh, fantastic. I think I like that thought process that you can slowly introduce people step by step instead of kind of like, bam. It makes a lot of sense because people become very like standoffish when you're like, here, take this all. But when you give them little pieces of information here and there, and I agree with that. Like there's some times where I have disagreements with people online. Oh, wow. Yes, I have disagreements with people online. And it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to give you a breadcrumb here. I'd like you to go and look into this. And I will tell you exactly where to go and what to look at. And we're talking government websites, FDA or something along that line. And it's like, hey, go check this out, because everybody wants, you give me proof, you tell me exactly where to find it. And it's like, oh my gosh. So I give them a little bit, but then you gotta, they got to get the training wheels off and do some of that work themselves. So that's what they do. And hopefully I can start to change minds that way, more of a gentle persuasion rather than force. And I think that really, really works a lot better. But, and I find it funny that you're like, 2004, they're saying, I'm going back to this book, 2004, 50,000 years, maximum 100. And now we're at like close to 500,000 years. What's not to say in 20 to 30 years, we'll be laughing at our books and being like, oh yeah, 500,000? You guys, that's hilarious. It was like 1.5 million or something along that line, because we keep discovering, we keep learning more. And that's the most important thing. Science is never, ever settled. That's the most unscientific statement. That's propaganda. Okay. So if you guys hear that, if you guys are listening and they're like, the science is settled or history is settled, this is rock solid, this is it. There's always room for change. Always. With the stuff that I've researched as well, I'm always open to be told that I am wrong. And here's why. We should always be open to hearing another side of a legitimate argument, not someone freaking out and yelling at you and calling you names or stuff like that.
Yes, totally agree with you. And, the same I'm trying to do with other kind of, again, conspiracy theories in the brackets, not to be offended. I'm also into conspiracy theories, but how these things are called, by skeptics and debunkers, that, for instance, giants, there are plenty of conspiracy theories about giants and plenty of different threats to it. And I say, okay, I cannot prove to you right now. I haven't been into Smithsonian, into their archives or something. Cannot prove to you that, it's all true that they have hidden the evidence for giants or something, or I haven't found the skeletons that were like 2+ or meter tall. No, but wait a minute. Right now, we are living as, the only species of hominids on Earth. There is no other, chimpanzees, orangutans, and other are not close to us in this sense. But other species of hominids in the past were much closer to us, like the Neanderthals, who were also thought in the past, at the beginning of the last century, that they were our ancestor. And then, it became apparent that they were not our direct ancestor, but were living parallel to that. And right now we are actually finding more and more of these hominids who are coexisting with us. I think during our last conversation, I already mentioned that we coexisted at some point a little bit less than 100,000 years ago with 5 other species of hominids. And I remember I was on Jimmy Church Radio recently live, and, he pulled out news article that another species of hominid coexisting with human beings was just found in China. So we are discovering more and more things. And if we have just even one example of coexisting of us anatomically modern humans with other hominids, why we couldn't have coexisted also with giants? If we coexisted with Homo florescensis, which were 1 meter tall, so they were like called hobbits. So maybe they were also the giant one, who knows? So, but we are discovering more and more of that. And I was positively surprised when I started studying last year at the university, because, when I encounter debunkers and shouters, I call them shouters on the internet. No, you're wrong. There were no giants, no civilizations. As you said, science knows everything. It's settled down. And when I went to the university, I have high degree teachers, one of the biggest ones in Poland, which I'm very, it's very cool for me. And, when we started, reading truly academic sources of the highest sort, only in, finally at this level, these people are true that, we do not have much evidence about that. For instance, in ancient Sumer, from, let's say, one period of Sumerian history, we have like hundreds of thousands of clay tablets, but 90% of them come from 2 cities out of almost 30. So imagine, there is lots of evidence, but only 2 cities out of 30, left as this evidence. And they say, we do not have much evidence because everything is degrading. The same thing, as I said in my book, the first chapter is like to start with imagination and to firstly, before coming to Atlantis and lost civilization topics, I start my book with this idea how long it takes for civilization to decay. And it turns out that, just a few tens of thousands of years would even be enough for our modern civilization to decay. So, imagine what was 10,000 BC or 100,000 years BC or even before that. Most of the evidence wouldn't last till, until today. And I remember plenty of skeptics, no, I'm wrong, it's not true. But right now I'm studying and I'm getting more and more confirmations of my conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are turning out to be right all the time. And I see confirmations that, yes, we do not know much. The same with the hominids that, finally, archaeologists, paleontologists are saying, finally at this high academic level that, yes, we find, for instance, only two evidence for this hominid and only a few from this. Nothing much survived. And okay, here were special conditions because there was mud or something or oil and this, kind of skeleton survived. But it's just our reconstruction of the skeleton and we had like only 20% of all the bones from it. So finally at this level, I see, that as I was always just saying that we do not know much about our history. And people say, no, we know everything from the prehistory. It's all the pieces of the puzzles are there. But finally, right now I see that, at true academic level, people are saying, no, we do not know much. Even, the modern scientific consensus about even the pyramids is that we do not know how they were built. And probably even they say we will never know because, there are no sources on that. So yeah, I was positively, surprised when I started studying.
I think that's actually that's amazing that at least these academics, and too bad they weren't a little bit louder, because the shouters, like you said, they scream and unfortunately they get a lot of people listening. And I believe that it is very intellectually, just intellectual that we're able to say, we don't know. I think that's the most brilliant word that we can use. We don't know. We have, and you're saying like, we have only three cities out of 20, or how many did you say, out of 30 or something like that?
Yeah, a little bit less than 30 cities, and from like 2 is 90% of all the artifacts from a particular period, let's say. Yeah.
Okay, so
and mostly because they were burned down. And, clay is very fragile material. And, there was a war and 2 cities or 3 cities were completely burned down. So because of burning down accidental of the cities, we have all the evidence. But from, the conquerors, actually, we do not have much in this scenario.
So it's interesting that we only have maybe like 10 to 20% in reference to the bones, in reference to this clay tablets. We only have like 10 to 20%. And we're using that. Some people are using that as their scientific basis to state emphatically, no, this is our history. And it's nice. It's a breath of fresh air to hear that, no, these academics are actually saying, well, this is all we have. This is all we can go on. This is what we can use, but we still don't know 100%. And I can side with that all day. I'm like, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can, even elaborate on that. As I said, I was very positively surprised. I even gave a few copies of my book to, doctors and professors, and some of them said, okay, we are not into this kinds of theories as historians, but they said that, yeah, it's cool that people explore history and are interested in, the most ancient past that may not be interesting to some people. So I was positively also surprised at that. But when it comes, to the lack of evidence, we are even learning the methodology of a historian. And, these shouters and debunkers who have all of the publicity, they even don't represent the official academic view of everything. They represent, just as in politics, just part, side, one camp of the academics who are, who have their belief that, this is what we know. We may know a little bit more than that, but we should stick to it. So they are on this side. But actually, here we are learning, we have even classes like methodology of a historian, and we are being taught that, the work of a historian, is like a work, like a job. You can have, your personal opinion, but when you're doing something academically as a historian, you need to be, you need to try to debunk everything, even, assumptions in all the sources, what is known, what is unknown. It's just it's like your job. It's like, let's say you're a surgeon, you are so experienced, 20, 30 years of experience that, we can, okay, I will get this patient right, in a few seconds with a few moves. But for instance, legally, there are problems, and maybe legally you cannot, okay, I will do it my way. You need to go through all the procedures because maybe this patient will then, sue you because you use a different method and, this patient needed, to have like some heart transplant or something in a particular way. So you sometimes need to step down from, your own experience and okay, or, encountering a Karen, again in the brackets that, Karen is shouting, oh, I want this. Okay. So you will put away your experience and do it, everything logically, everything according to particular set of procedures. So the same with a historian that, okay, you can, try writing things on Atlantis, on these topics, but you need, to follow all the methodologies and they are just made there, and they are all about, trying to debunk everything. Maybe this is not true. Maybe this is not true. And you check out, okay, if it is not true, then what? If it is true, do we have any evidence for that? And so on. It's just like a job. It's not like, oh, this is the official opinion or this is the official knowledge. This is the truth. No, we even, had like classes at philosophy of science or something like that, but not like that, but a little bit into that what I've been talking again for years and people were, oh, I'm wrong. Science is about the truth. No, science is not about the truth. It's just, when it comes to history, it's only about reconstructing the past according to the sources. And if we have no sources from a particular period, we cannot reconstruct it. Even if you say, oh, at this period, there was Atlantis, there were previous civilization. If we have no, sources on that, this is outside of the domain of the academic historian. So it's never about reconstructing the truth. It's about, just logically, rationally, showing what is and what is not within the sources. So it also opens mind to people that, okay, you may have an opinion that Atlantis existed. You may be convinced to that, but it's not that, you are according to the academics wrong. No, you're just, speculating that it may be right. Maybe we'll, find it in the future. What we as, let's say, alternative pseudo historians were telling you for years that, okay, we show you this set of evidence and then we say maybe in the future we'll find lost civilizations, or we are convinced that there have been lost civilizations in the past. So again, this is mind-opening how history works. And as I said, these shouters, these skeptics are even not, representing how academic knowledge and how academic version of the history works.
I think that's amazing. I think that's how everybody should work. The only issue is that we have a lot of people who have confirmation bias and they go into the job with this confirmation bias and then they taint it, they cause it to go in a direction that they want it to go. Or perhaps they're being influenced, an outside influence to go in a certain direction as well. Could be monetary or could be anything. And we've seen that in the past. I've seen it in many different aspects, not only historians, we're talking medical, we're talking many political as well, that I think it's very important that we remove our confirmation biases and we go in neutral to many, many different things. And unfortunately, I think the world now these days is becoming very jaded one way or the other, and people are very set with their biases and it just disrupts everything. So, yeah. So Alexander, you are back in school right now. You're saying you're back in school. What are you studying? What are you working on?
As I said, I started just last year and I was positively again surprised because, plenty of people, not like one professor or one doctor, looked at, okay, I know a lot of things, I'm very good. I actually have like all 100% except for like 25 subjects with 100% and only 2 like on 80%. So almost 100% of everything. But, and even they reached out to me, to have, I started, but I will have more in the future months. But again, this year that I will have personal study schedule. They have given it to me, not like, oh, I want personal. No, they, reached out to me and they said, they need people who are interested in such topics and not, oh, plenty of people are, oh, okay, I will just, pass the exams and, go away, forget about everything. And they have given me the personal study schedule. And I said, I'm interested in these topics, so I will finally be having like a little bit of specialization in ancient Middle East, including religions and languages. And I will have from a few different departments at my university. It was I said that, oh, maybe I can, learn. I wanted always to learn. And I had like some textbooks in the past and learned basics of Hebrew, ancient Greek. This will be very useful even for my personal, stuff, not only from, let's say, the academic research. So I'll have this like ancient Middle East as a part of my specialization. And even, in the basic course, we started Latin. So I will also, after like a few years, we'll have, fully comprehended with the paper, like the certificate in Latin, ancient Greek, and Hebrew, which will be very useful for me, even personally. So I'm really glad about that, and also I will be, and I'm in the process finishing of writing my first peer-reviewed articles. They said, okay, because I made just a presentation about the great flood connections between the Bible, Mesopotamia, India, and others, and they said that okay. It's so interesting. No one talks about that. No one researches that, even here in Poland or in Europe or even abroad. It's not like very popular topic in the academic circle. So they said, yeah. And they, they ordered me to some extent to write an academic paper on that. And they said, okay, but I just need in this paper to be critical. It's, anything. I can even write on Atlantis if I want to, but I need to be critical. I need to act as a historian. So it's only, the basic requirement, but I can, write on Atlantis, even let's say lost civilizations to some extent, but, I think there is too little evidence within the academic realm to talk about that. And I even think of, in the future, going this route again, to slowly expanding the view of skeptics and of different people. I even think of a analysis of Plato's Atlantis, and that the roots of Atlantis in Egypt, just as Plato is telling us, are possible within even the academic realm. And I think no one ever did that before. I don't want to go into details here because maybe someone will go before me, but I want to do that, and in order to show people that going next step, that within the academic realm it can be proven that Atlantis was not 100% fantasy of Plato as it is commonly accepted, but at least there were these roots in Egypt of Atlantis. So this is what I will be doing. And because I started with the Great Flood, and we can talk about it in a minute because it's crazy story. It can completely change beliefs of plenty of people about the Bible and ancient Mesopotamia and our history, but I will be also focusing on the Old Testament and its connections and parallels to other Middle Eastern especially, but also a little bit of Greek sources from before the Bible was written.
Okay, yeah, I definitely do want to go get into that. We can get into the flood. I did have a question though before we get into that. Now, I know we talked about some advanced civilizations that were before us, so possibly such as Atlantis and whatnot. I have a question that I've been thinking about. What is like the strongest clue that you would think, like maybe a smoking gun that advanced civilizations have left for us? What would that be? It could be multiple, I guess, but what would you say that would be?
In my opinion, the best evidence is in similarities between especially the architecture all over the world. I think the megalithic, the Cyclopean walls, which can be found, the most famous one in Peru, but also, all over the world, Egypt, Pacific Ocean, Europe, even here in Poland, we have, sound foundations of castles, of medieval or early medieval castles, have such polygonal masonry as can be found very similar in Peru and all over the world, Far East, Asia, Japan, China, Indonesia, and much more. So I think this is the best. But again, it's all about interpretation. We can interpret, okay, it's the hardest, but also the easiest way to, create from huge megalithic blocks and so on. So, it's all about the interpretation if we accept it as evidence. But I also think that, textual evidence about different, lost civilizations, lost cities like Atlantis in, let's say Europe, in Greece, but also Aztlan in Mesoamerica, but also the details because, okay, let's be skeptical as the skeptics. There is just one connection, Atlantis, Aztlan. No, because, both of you just need to, logically, again, analyze all of that. Okay, Atlantis, Aztlan, first connection. The other one, it was lost civilization. Another one that it was, before it's a civilization and it sank. So another one. Another one would be that, for instance, later Aztec city Tenochtitlan was a model of Aztlan, and how it looked like, almost like Atlantis, and it was modeled after this Aztlan, which may prove to us that Aztlan was Atlantis, 100%. And maybe, okay, we can then be again skeptical that Atlantis and Aztlan didn't exist, but we can show by these that, there was at least the belief of if we are skeptical, that there was a belief of our ancient ancestors in many places of the world that such place described in the same way existed in the distant past. So, but also when it comes to this evidence, I think anomalous maps found mostly by Graham Hancock and before him, Charles Hapgood, of, different kinds of things, not only, the famous Piri Reis map of Antarctica and other ones like that, but for instance, casual maps from, medieval times, Renaissance times that are even sometimes telling us, even at the back of the Piri Reis map, there's mention that Piri Reis used ancient sources which was inspired by ancient sources, probably from the Library of Alexandria, but, casual maps that show us very particular examples of pre-ice age world, because, there was the sea level change of 120 meters, which is like a skyscraper of sea level change. And for instance, some particular islands were there before 10,000 BC and right now they're underwater. Or for instance, land bridges like the Beringia Land Bridge between Alaska and Russia. These things are very often portrayed on these maps. And you can say, okay, in one or two examples, they're just coincidences. But if we find like 30, 50 or more of such maps, we see that there is much more to that. And I think that it connects with the megalithic architecture, even with what Plato is telling us about Atlantis, that it wasn't just lost civilization, lost advanced civilization. No, it was a maritime empire, maritime culture that had, its influence. Plato is telling us over the entire Mediterranean Sea. Egypt was its colony. And I think that, I don't know, who the Atlanteans were, what Atlantis was exactly, but I see evidence with all of that I've talked about, that it was some kind of pretty advanced people that traveled all over the world by boats probably, and to some extent mapped the entire world back there. Maybe, build these megaliths, maybe that's why most of these megaliths are aligned to particular, astronomical phenomena and others. And then they spread this message, and that's why we also have plenty of mentions of teachers of mankind who are also very similar between plenty of the cultures. So I think this is the best evidence. And also, finishing for a moment this thread of lost civilizations, we are finding that our history, not only this, we spoke about anatomically modern humans, but we even find that, civilization during historical times was much older. And I remember I was again started this, specialization on the ancient Middle East. So I read plenty of, very huge books about the Sumerians themselves, like tons of information. I don't remember all of that for sure, but, I was reading that. And I remember that, okay, we accept that ancient Sumerian civilization began about 3500 BC, about that. But even a little bit more than 1,000 years before that, there was almost as big of a civilization as the Sumerians in the Middle East, in the same place. But we don't call it a civilization because they, at least from our records that survived, haven't used any kind of writing, any kind of script. So we start the history, in the textbooks. Sumerians began in the 4th millennium BC, because only from this period we have, all the things that are connected to civilization, like cities, like different kinds of hierarchy of people. And then only at this time we find evidence for writing. But at least 1,000 years before that, we call different cultures like Ubaid culture, Halafian cultures, and other. Even I think, in my opinion, there was a bigger civilization before the Sumerian, because during the known Sumerian times, ancient Sumer was much more divided. There were city-states who were fighting each other. Culture was a different between, different cities. And before that, it was more unified. Entire, Mesopotamia between the Twin Rivers was unified culturally, architecturally, and had almost as big cities as later on. But we don't have any evidence for writing, so we cannot say that Sumer started 8,000 or 2,000 years before that. And the same, for instance, when it comes to, taking the similar example of, just one bureaucratic or egoistic thing. And because of that, we cannot call it a civilization. Here in Eastern Europe, we have plenty of proto-civilizations, as they are called. So pre-civilizations. And they were as big as ancient Sumer. Ancient Sumerian cities at their peak had between 30 and 50,000 people at one city. 30,000 to 50,000 people at a single city. And here in Eastern Europe, we find cities of 30,000 people. So the same, as big as the Sumerian ones. And they were very advanced. For instance, these were the first people from our recorded history to use chariots, to use different kinds of wheel base, things. That maybe they haven't used horses, maybe they used oxes, for these chariots. But again, first kind of chariots in history in the entire world. And again, we actually have examples from this proto-civilization, which was about 1,000 years before ancient Sumer. So first civilization, but we have examples of their script, or something that looks like script. And because it only looks like script and we cannot decipher it yet, we cannot call it a civilization, because maybe these are just, symbols. They have no meaning. It's not script, but it looks, everyone can look at and it looks like script. So just because we don't have this script translated and described, we cannot call it civilization. At least 1,000 years before the Sumerians, as big, as the Sumerian cities. And there are a few of this. There are different names. Da Vinci is the most famous one, but it's not the biggest one. There is like Gumenica. It's very hard even for me as a Polish person, because like it's Bulgarian, Romanian, and Serbian name. Like Gumenica something, tripartite name for this, area in which proto-civilizations, like huge ones, existed, but we cannot call them like that. So it's crazy for me that even, and it shows us that we do not know much about our history, that we are taking the roots of civilization back and back again by thousands of years. And, even academically speaking, not like conspiracy theory, alternative research, thinking, but official thinking. And why not, we say in 20, 30 years that there was a civilization 10,000 BC, just as Atlantis, mentioned by Plato. So I think that we are right now on the brink of a paradigm shift when it comes to history. I think it will take like next maybe 20 years or more, but, our history is being taken back, more and more.
I'm excited for that, actually. It would be a refreshing, a breath of fresh air, because this is something that is, a lot of people have believed it, but if we're able to prove it, that is amazing. And, when you said when you talked about like smoking gun was like the walls, these Peruvian megalithic structures, these walls and how they're constructed. And we're seeing that throughout the world in different places of the world. It has to be derived from one origin, Yes, of course, it's going to change. Of course, as materials change, it'll be, when you're in a different area, you're going to have different materials going to change. But if the base on how they do it is the same, it's derived from one place. It's very interesting, and it's this technology as well. And you're talking about Teotihuacan, right? In just outside Mexico City, that is somewhat modeled after Atlantis. Is that the?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they said that, Teotihuacan was a late capital of the Aztecs, during the conquistadors' time. And it was basically, right now it's a bit different, but it was on the lake Texcoco in Mexico, as you've said. And, it was partially natural and artificial islands, connected by bridges. And they said that it was modeled about this previous lost civilization called Aztlan, Atlantis. And, this Teotihuacan was, as I've said, maybe it wasn't, because Plato is describing Atlantis having concentric circles of islands. But again, main island with connected to its islands. And at the middle, there was Templo Mayor, so the Grand Temple. And we know how Aztec or Mesoamerican pyramids look like. They aren't like the Egyptian ones, with straight triangles, but they are like artificial mounds with flat top And on the top, there is a chapel, a temple of some sort.
Correct.
And you know how Plato, I think most of us know how Plato described Atlantis, that in the middle of Atlantis, there was a mound, a hill, and on this hill, there was a temple of Poseidon. So I think that even, this other, Mesoamerican pyramids are modeled on this, first hill, primeval mound in the Egyptian cultures. And again, after this primeval mound, pyramids of Egypt were modeled. But here in, Mexico, they just use, we'll build artificial mound. And, some pyramids are very straight with this, but some of the Mayan, for instance, pyramids are looking like made out of stone, hills, mounds. And, at the top, there's a chapel or a temple. So the same, I think it's 100% proof that, there's further connection between Atlantis and Aztlan if they modeled like that and they've created something that looks like Atlantis, island connected with smaller islands by bridges. Also, this Templo Mayor, which is like a mound with a temple. So the same like the Temple of Poseidon on a hill in Atlantis.
This reference of Aztlan, it is very common here in Mexico. The Mayans say that is where they were derived. That's where they came from, was for the Aztlan people. When you go to different archaeological sites here in Mexico that I've been to personally, there's even in Etzna, there's reference to the house of the Atlantean. Okay, where did that come from? Why did you guys pick that name? It's like you said, it's a smoking gun as to so many things. And there's the Aztlan stones. There is so much reference to Aztlan
Atlantis here. In Tula, like these people, these huge sculptures of people holding these handbags, which are all the world there can be found. So yeah.
Yeah. What is those handbags? That is, in Egyptian culture, we see it I think in Sumerian as well. And
Mesopotamia, all over the Mesopotamia. Yeah. And again, in Mexico, in South America, I don't know personally, maybe there is some like kind of advanced technology in it, but I think it may just represent knowledge because they are very often connected, for instance, in ancient Mesopotamia with not Anunnaki, as most people think, but with Apkallu, so the teachers of mankind, the Oannes being, this half fish, half human person who were the head chief of the teachers of mankind. And I think that's why if they are, very often with the teachers of mankind, there may, be about knowledge. It's also very interesting is that, again, a little bit like loose connection that I found at the university when we were learning about the shift from the Neolithic Revolution, and hunter-gatherers into, first cities, first civilizations. The biggest actually thing when it comes to, archaeologists and historians, like the biggest thing when it comes to this change was probably some kind of containers like buckets, because before them, people couldn't, have any kind of like store milk or anything like that. So they say, even from archaeological records, we know that, when people finally learned about having buckets or, clay that wouldn't, soak things. So it was the biggest shift that enabled humans to build civilizations. So maybe it's also that, they knew that, these people, these teachers of mankind have given us buckets. Maybe it's just as simple as that. Maybe these are simply buckets, which had huge impact throughout, according to the mainstream, how, people went from hunter-gatherers into first cities and civilization, that containers, any kind of containers, vases and stuff like that were the biggest thing. And we see it even from the archaeological records. So I think, wait a minute, maybe these are just buckets. And maybe these people, were bringing civilization with each other. And it is often mentioned that these teachers encountered so primitive humans like hunter-gatherers, like even there were cannibals back there. Like if we go to this Sentinel Island, these people just, shooting arrows at us, being very primitive. So it's the same, like Plutarch, a late source, but Plutarch on his Isis and Osiris is telling us that Osiris, and he mentions that, traveled all over the world and he encountered these primitive hunter-gatherers and he taught them the basics of, even living in society. It's mentioned, not like just cities and stuff like that, but living in society, not killing each other, basics, of craftsmanship. The same in Zendavesta Ima. There is a very interesting description of Ima teaching people everything about making settlements, that, oh, you need to build canals, to get the water to the fields. Oh, you need to build a wall. You need to create houses like this. Like this. He teaches them, the basics, as if these people even couldn't, create a simple house. So I think that it's about that.
Okay. That's fascinating. And I never even thought about buckets or containers being that much of an archaeological or like a historical or cultural like boost, but it's absolutely true. If you cannot contain, you cannot store things, then you're living almost kind of day to day in essence. So if you have a way to store items and put them in a container, like you said, that doesn't get wet or soak through,
especially
or
water, milk.
Yeah, that's incredible. I never even considered that. So it might be,
Me too,
be containers.
The first time
it's as simple as that. Okay. So, let's go to the flood. You mentioned that we were going to jump into the flood. I would love to hear where we go with this.
I will start again with the Neolithic Revolution, finishing the old thread with flood, because what we know right now about the Neolithic Revolution is that it started not in the plains, like where the later Sumerian cities were built, but it started very high, near the mountains, on the highlands, just, beneath the mountains, all over the Mesopotamia, like Zagros, Taurus Mountains, this famous Fertile Crescent. And we know that, biologically that it was there because there were the perfect conditions, the, perfect crops for that. And what is interesting that in, all the Mesopotamian or other stories about the Great Flood from at least this region, it is said that, okay, there was a flood. The ark went into these mountains. Either, one version, it was, the famous Ararat, like in the Bible. In other, there was like a different mountain, but it went there, so very high. And then it started civilization settlements again. So even, let's be skeptical. Maybe there was no flood, no ark or something. But I think that even in these flood stories, there may be memory of people remembering that, okay, civilization started not, between the rivers as later civilizations, but it started, as we find it archaeologically, in the highlands, because it started there, and we see how crops evolved, at least in, this particular period of time, about 10,000, 9,000 BC. So maybe, even if we're skeptical that there was no flood, we see that there is a memory that, civilization settlement started in the mountainous areas, on the highland areas, and then it went down. And, again, it's very similar to the flood story that, okay, there were huge waters, so people, went with the ark on the mountain, and there, the waters were coming down, and then they could, go to lowlands. So it's another very, coincidental thing that these stories are telling us, what actually, archaeologists, even mainstream ones and historians, are telling us about the Neolithic Revolution, the switch from hunter-gatherers to settlements. So let's say if the flood was real, so maybe, the part from the Neolithic Revolution up until the first civilization is the part after the flood that people started civilization and settlements again. Just as, again, conspiracy theory people were telling that, okay, maybe the flood again is connected with Atlantis, thinking of lost civilizations like Atlantis. And we see that it's very, very possible. So this is just one connection with what we were talking previously about the buckets, the switch, etc. But when it comes to, again, what is, I think, the biggest shock to many people, I think it may be, the biggest game changer is that the biblical version is, I would say, especially of the flood, but tons of this stuff from Genesis especially is like in 80-90% copy of the previous sources. And we see that, because we can date the biblical version by, for instance, semantics, by the language they use, and also by the history of ancient Palestine, which was, there wasn't anything big during the times of Sumer or something. It was like almost an empty country in comparison to Sumer or Egypt. So there wasn't something very, there weren't people who probably were being there. Even, Abraham came from the Sumerian city of Ur, so maybe at Ur he had the, information about, the flood, the fall from heaven, the Genesis, even the Genesis version of the creation of, the world is similar to some extent. There are a few differences with the Unleashed the epic of creation of ancient Mesopotamians. But when it comes to the Bible, I was shocked, and it can shock plenty of people. It's a copy of plenty of previous versions from Mesopotamia, probably written during the Babylonian and Persian times when the first Babylon conquered the Israelites, and then Persians also conquered them, but they have given them freedom. And that's why, for instance, even the Persian king, I don't remember if it was Cyrus, I think, was like a messiah according to the Old Testament, because, he was so good. He even let the Israelites rebuild, the Temple of Solomon back then. So they copied it. And even we see such, because, okay, the story of the flood, there was Noah, and, the God warned him of the flood. He took all the species of animals and his family onto the ark. There was the flood, etc. Even the number of people taken onto the ark, there is Noah, three wives of his sons, and Noah's wife is Noah plus 7 people. The same is in India. There is Manu plus 7 sages. The same is in Mesopotamia, but not in all stories, but in some there is the main hero, there is Zusudra, Atrahasis, Utnapishtim with 7 sages, for instance. And even if we take a look at the oldest text, the oldest from 2000 BC and older, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the description of the flood is almost the same, that when they were already on the ark, for instance, there is the flood, they are waiting for it to end. We see in the biblical story that they sent 2 birds. The first bird, Noah sends a bird. The bird is coming back. So it means to Noah that this bird couldn't find a safe place to stay. So it came back because there was flood all over the world. He couldn't find, a single rock or a single land. And then after some time, Noah sends another bird. And this another bird is not coming back, which means that he found a safe place, probably, some land or some rock or some, mountain or something like that. So it means that the flood is coming to an end. In the Gilgamesh, it's the same. The main hero is Utnapishtim, and Utnapishtim sends, but I think 3 birds, not 2. And, first is coming back, the second is coming back, and the third is not coming back, which means again that the flood is ending. It's, even the details and even how, if, I have it in front of me, if I was reading to you, Gilgamesh and Noah, even, the structure of how it is, being presented is almost the same. And even right now, when I was, again, I'm doing research, finishing this paper, even the name Noah himself, we think, biblical Noah is probably a copy of not a previous name, but just of an epithet. So description, like, let's say, probably of Atrahasis, later hero from Mesopotamia is called Atrahasis. And Atrahasis has his epithets, like, let's say, mighty one, the great one. And one of the epithets, I don't remember exactly which one, is similar to Noah. Almost the same structurally. So it's even, I don't want to be that bad, that harsh when it comes to the Bible, but it seems that the biblical writers were even, not, don't want to say not intelligent, but they weren't very, learned into these languages. And they copied not the name, but just, one of the epithets from it. And it shows us very well that, it's a copy and it's, just a very bad one. So, we just are scribing something, copying like before the exam and you're making mistakes.
I'm going to ask you then, well, if we're looking at it, it's a copy, but it doesn't mean that it's not true. It means that it's looking like, yes, this happened. You just changed a couple of things of it, but this has happened. Now, what's the possibility of, okay, it is a high possibility it could be a copy. What's the possibility of it actually just being a repeat? Like you're saying, history repeats itself. What's not the chance of it playing out almost identical as it did, like 2,000 years prior? And then, of course, we have this again. Is that a possibility? Is that a potential possibility as well? That, okay, he sent out 3 birds, he sent out 2 birds, but it's still that this is a chance that it could have happened before?
When it comes to the flood itself, yes. But when it comes, what I wanted to portray is that the biblical version, it's not like, because plenty of people say, okay, the biblical flood can be found in Mesopotamian sources, which means that the Bible is correct. it doesn't mean that there was no flood completely, but the biblical description is not original. And we see it, for instance, I provided one example of, bad copy of not a name, but just a epithet. But there are also a few other like that. For instance, it's about what is called historiography. So how different kinds of peoples looked at their history. So let's say the Sumerian historiography is, for instance, about the Sumerian kings list, Gilgamesh, etc. Our modern historiography is the mainstream version of the history. Ancient Greek historiography would be the gods, and at the beginning was the chaos and so forth. And historians, because I was doing a little bit extensive research on that, historians are looking, okay, but what is the biblical historiography on that? And you see that it's again a copy from the Mesopotamia, but changed. And the famous that before the flood, people were living much longer for 600 years, 900 years. And after the flood, God said, no, 120 years is the maximum. And the same is actually in, Mesopotamian sources, even the Sumerian kings list that, after the flood, people live much shorter. And it's even described there in very plentiful details. Like in Epic of Gilgamesh, there is a mention that gods were very annoyed with human. They were fed up with them. They were so annoying to them, so loud. So that's why they sent the great flood to destroy them. And of course, one of the gods rebelled. That's why the Atlantis is the main hero who survives the flood on his ark. And they said, okay, we will leave the humans, let them live, but we will send to them. It's like the idea, I don't know how it's called in English, but before that, in the Garden of Eden, that, the primeval sin, primeval sin. So here's the same thing. Okay, we'll leave humanity. It survived the flood, but we will have it, had this defect. So they won't be, living. They were almost immortal before the flood. They could be killed, but, they weren't limited, let's say, genetically to live 100, 200, 300 years. But after the flood, the gods say, okay, we'll limit their longevity. We will let them, be in pain. So they give the pain just as, the birth pain mentioned in the Bible. So we see even details that are almost the same in ancient, Mesopotamian sources. And okay, again, here in this example, we can say that the Bible is the same rendition of these things, but we see how it was written down by philological staff, how they use, and it's a copy. So in this sense, it doesn't mean that, the Bible is completely false or something, but it's not original. It's based on older sources, but it may have been true. But we see that both historically, philologically, what the language is used, like such things as this name of Noah. So it's not that the Bible, that these are the two parallel stories, because plenty of people, even in our space, believe that, okay, if there was a flood in Gilgamesh and Atlantis, it means that the Bible is correct and, it's under evidence for the Bible. No. The Bible, is the evidence for the Gilgamesh and Noah that this tradition was also used later. And we see, again, we can date plenty of passages, and the biblical version is very, very recent one when it comes to time, because Mesopotamian ones are even from more than 2000 BC, from 1800s BC, but the biblical one was written down between 600 BC and about 300, 200 BC.
Okay. Interesting. I still find it interesting, and I do believe it does give credence that, yes, there was a global flood, and there are so many cultures throughout the world that document a global flood, which is, there's no denying that this happened. I know a lot of people want to deny that there was a global flood, which I find ridiculous considering how many civilizations, how many structures we're finding underwater. And like you're saying, it was what, 120 meters? Yeah. That's
like a small skyscraper.
Yeah, that's a
Not
lot.
small, but skyscraper.
Yes.
Yeah. And imagine standing on a beach and looking like a skyscraper, tall of water. And this is the change of sea levels.
Yeah, and which is close to, and for those who are in feet and not meters, but that's close to about 350. So you're saying 120, so 3 times 3,
yes.
So there's 300. Let's say around 340 or 50 or 60 feet is the change.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to do math in my head when I'm not mathing well right now.
It's 25 all over the world, sank a total area of about 25 million square kilometers, which is the same as the entire North America, not just the US, but with Mexico, with Canada, with Alaska, with everything. So such amount of land all over the world sank during this time.
Was gone. Yeah, and it is
Yeah.
gone. It's okay. I know maybe you don't know this, but where did the water come from? Like, where was this mass amount of water being stored? Was it
In the
underneath us?
glaciers.
The glaciers?
No,
Okay.
in the glaciers. And we have evidence actually for that. And the glaciers were, covering most of the North America, Europe, because again, skeptics are saying, you idiots, the scientists are, trying to find the evidence in the hardest possible, areas of the world, like in Sahara or in the Amazon rainforest, which is hard for us, to dig. And why you do not search in Europe, which is easier? Because most of the Europe, like half of it, up until, the Pyrenees, I think in the Alps, was covered in the glaciers. So there was no civilization. And we know even from prehistorical records that people were slowly going, further and further north as glaciers were receding because they were melting. There were actually a few ice ages, but we are talking here about, the last time, the times of Atlantis, 10 to 12,000 BC. So most of the northern hemisphere was covered in, total ice sheets. And here in Poland, interestingly, we have plenty of, evidence for that, and plenty of, places even nearby where I live of, very deep grooves in, in the land, creating this kind of environment. So yeah, it was probably like that.
And so this is in reference to possibly like the Younger Dryas period, is like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson talk a lot about.
Yeah, this is exactly that. And even let's say for a moment that we are, again, I always try to, feel the skeptics, because why they're thinking like that. So let's be skeptical for a moment. There was no cataclysm at the end of the last ice age. Let's assume it was natural, this 120 meters sea rise. Okay, but even in this kind of scenario, it would still be remembered by people. And even nowadays or throughout history, in the medieval times, ancient times, most of the villages, cities are nearby water, like nearby rivers, nearby sea, nearby some lakes. So if there was such a sea level change, most of these kind of cities would be completely destroyed by sinking. And, even if there was no cataclysm, I think that most of these cities that sank would be remembered as Atlantis, that, there was a city or a civilization that completely sunk and was completely gone. And as I've said before, with plenty of islands that we knew were there before the last ice age and now are completely underwater. And even, from the ancient times, we have plenty in the Mediterranean Sea, ancient Greek and ancient Egyptian cities, which were there, let's say, 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, but right now are completely submerged under meters of water. So imagine, the Atlantis, 120 meters of sea level change. Even when it comes to the meters, and the depth, when I was researching these ancient Sumer, I found an interesting information that they were digging at Ur or Uruk, this famous Sumerian city, at about 22 meters. And they knew that at about 22 meters depth, it was layer of 2000 something BC, because they found some sources, some clay tablets or something. At 22 meters, 2000 BC. So 10,000 BC would be, more than, again, 100 meters. So more than 300 feet, beneath everything. So I think there is huge potential of everything, even if we take the skeptical route that there was no cataclysm, that it was gradual over, let's say, 8,000 or 2,000 years of the sea level change. I think it would very well, if, let's say, ancient Rome was completely sunk from let's say that the histories, right, that ancient Rome from our historical records sunk because there was, sea level change. We would remember it just as Atlantis, that it was a civilization that sunk completely.
When we remember ancient Rome, I know, and just in reference to Atlantis and ancient Rome, Rome wasn't just, it was a city, but it was an empire. And people don't understand that, if one part of it sinks, there's still these other factions that will still be around. And of course, that is like when you said like Egypt was maybe like seeded by Atlantis possibly, which is
colony.
Yes. So yeah, and we have all these colonies throughout. It would be like the UK sinking, and then their colonies are still existing. And we're talking thousands of years later, we'll remember it. Someone will, and they'll try to, and the younger generations will be like, no, that's just a myth. That never happened. That never existed.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. Now, when we talk about this, when you're talking about like something that I always find really interesting is I know this is much closer history, and maybe it's not in your wheelhouse, but people talk about mud floods. Okay, and we talk about we're digging down to find all these ancient Sumerian clay tablets. We're digging down in Rome to uncover these things. That means things are getting buried. Now, they're talking possibly in, I don't know, maybe the 16, 17, maybe the 1700s, that there were these mud floods, which was these vast amounts of mud that came and flooded certain areas. What is your take on that? Because that is something that, there's a lot of evidence that kind of points towards something happening, but I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, personally, I know of a lot, even here in Poland. It's one of the regions of this, Tartaria or, before the mud flood civilization. Personally, I haven't researched it so extensively, and I haven't found, very, very good evidence, just as in, the case of last ice age. And, we know geologically that there was the sea level, for instance. I haven't found any, true repeatable evidence for the mud flood. And, we have a few examples that look like that. But I think it's very natural for things over even 100 or 200 years to be buried by, lots of stuff. And I can compare it to ancient Mesopotamia from what I know. Ancient Mesopotamia was just found in 1840s. Before that, it was a myth just as Atlantis. And right now we know that ancient Mesopotamia is full of different civilizations: Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and a few more. And, even if you went in the 1700s to the Mesopotamia, you maybe found a few, artifacts, few clay tablets in the sand, but nothing crazy, no civilization, because everything was under, meters of dust, meters of grounds, meters of mud, because there in Mesopotamia, it was natural that, almost every single year, there was a flood, coming, and all, the mud was covering these abandoned Mesopotamian cities. And these became like a huge hills, artificial hills that were called tells. And, then we finally, after excavating one of these tells, we know, okay, this huge mound hill or something isn't natural, but it's probably another civilization or another ziggurat of the ancient Mesopotamians. But it was all covered. And we are talking here about, here we're talking about a few thousand years of our history, but, even ancient Greek historians, 500 BC, 300 BC, and later, even I think a few Roman ones, just, closing to our eras, were, were coming to Mesopotamia and still visiting some cities that were intact, not covered there. But we know, and it's again, a very, important historical analysis, just as in the case of the Bible. That, for instance, we know, I don't remember exactly, but I remember this, example that one ancient Roman historian, I think at the beginning of our current era, like 100 or 200 AD, went to Mesopotamia and he found one city. I don't remember, I think Babylon. But he was also telling us of an artificial hill. And we know historically that, this artificial hill was a city that was just, let's say, 100 or something or 200 years old and was completely covered in mud. So I think this is the best example that, things can get covered even in spans of 100, 200, 300 years. But unfortunately, I'm not that well researched into this, mud flood stuff. No. But I think this is a great example.
Yeah. No, okay, fantastic. I'm open to hearing more about it. Like I have done some episodes on Tartaria and mud floods. But I think that's I think I need to find someone who has really researched that to really dive deep into that. But if you are going into like Mesopotamia and cross-referencing the Bible as well to say, okay, well, this reference this. What have you done any research on the Tower of Babel? Is that something that is coming up and you've looked into or not yet?
Not that much, but again, what I've been researching about, looking at different opinions of the academics, it's mostly that, again, it was about this, Mesopotamia, it was, from before that, it was later, interpret differently, but unfortunately, I haven't done much on it. I focus on the flood and, the Genesis, the creation, even, the Adam and Eve, It's, Adumu in ancient Sumerian, which is, from clay and stuff like that. So large parts of the Genesis are based on the previous Mesopotamian texts. And the Tower of Babel, again, it's either an interpretation, of course. And it also shows us because Babylon was much later than, for instance, previous ancient Sumerian stuff, like even Epic of Gilgamesh, even Atlantis. It was later one. And I think it shows us that the biblical story is also later one, interpreted maybe later, maybe not 100% later, because Babylon was much more recent than the Gilgamesh and the flood and everything. So it was probably, this story of the Tower of Babel was after this, after this Sumerian stories. But unfortunately, I'm not very much haven't done much research on it yet.
No problem. I thought I would just pose that question. The Epic of, you keep referencing the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's something that I'm going to be getting into in the near future. But for those who are listening, can you just give them like a teaser of what the Epic of Gilgamesh really is and who he was?
I can even say, from plenty of times reading it and doing research on that Epic of Gilgamesh is truly epic for anyone interested in these times, because it's full of, even esoteric information, even, it can be a base for even lost civilization theories. It has so many threads. It has even, there are being mentioned hominids and stuff like that. But Epic of Gilgamesh is basically the oldest known text from, all around the world. And even though we have some examples of it from about 2000 BC, we have, all of the depictions, because there are motifs like the Gilgamesh, the main hero, being very strong and fighting with lions. And we have even Gilgamesh depictions hundreds of years before the Gilgamesh text, which means that it is much older. We just probably haven't found yet, the first versions of it, or maybe it was an oral story before that, which may also be connected, to all the theories that the Vedas are older, that Atlantis is older, that the flood is older, the flood story. So it's very interesting. But the Gilgamesh is basically, the Gilgamesh is also, as being, it's crazy, being the oldest known text to us. It's one of the most advanced when it comes to literature, because it has so many different threads, like philosophical threads about immortality and, about death of your friends, about even death itself. And it's, it's full of different things. It even has inside of it the Minotaur story. The Minotaur, from ancient Greece, that it was, this bull man, and there was a labyrinth. And in Gilgamesh, there is Humbaba, who is also, almost the same person. But there isn't mention of the labyrinth, but there is mention that there is this huge half bull, half human, and also, with some feathers creature that, Gilgamesh with his friend is trying to kill. And even, academics are saying that, yes, probably there is the same source when it comes to Epic of Gilgamesh and to the Minoan story of the, labyrinth, etc. Even academics are saying, yes, it's connected. So it's not like conspiracy theory. There is a mention of a hominid, that there is just like, human civilization, human cities. One of these cities ruled by Gilgamesh, who is actually partially a real historical figure, because it's mentioned in plenty of other texts. It's even mentioned not in mythical texts, like, let's say, academics don't say that the Sumerian kings lists, which are coming back tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years before written history, are right. Maybe they are mythological. But we have sources about Gilgamesh as being the king of the same city as in the Epic of Gilgamesh from historical records, that casual kings were, for instance, having battles with him. So he was a true figure in the ancient Mesopotamian times, probably, or most probably. And there is the city of Gilgamesh, but, Gilgamesh is the strongest one. He wins everything. He's the main hero, the best one. And, it's danger for other humans because, there is no competition for him. He's having all the women, all the best women. So the gods are creating a hominid. And it's mentioned that, it's an ape man, but who is intellectually almost as advanced as humans, that he can live, with humans, that it's, just like a hominid, like Neanderthal or something. There is a mention of that he is hairy and he is, stronger. this is again another thing that, if these people who written down the Gilgamesh or invented, let's say, the story of Gilgamesh, knew nothing about previous hominids, why they told in this story that he was also, having like his jaw stronger, details that are showing us that yes, hominids like Neanderthals maybe were almost as advanced as humans, but they were, for instance, shorter but stronger, had stronger bones, etc. And Gilgamesh is saying all of that. I think there is tons of, such golden nuggets in the Gilgamesh. And, then this hominid became the best friend of the Gilgamesh, and he's called Enkidu. But when they are the best friends, he's getting sick and he dies. And Gilgamesh is weighed. And this is, as I said, very advanced story when it comes to like modern stories, literature, etc. Because Gilgamesh sees for a moment that, wait a second, maybe I'm the strongest one, but the death still applies to me. I'm not immortal. And that's why where the flood comes in, because there is this previous story of the flood, because Gilgamesh is after the flood. And he finds out, okay, in the story of the flood, pre-Diluvian people, just as in the Bible, were almost immortal, or most of them were immortal. And he remembers that the main hero, Utnapishtim or Jushudra, depending on the source and the language, because it was Sumerian language, Akkadian language in which these texts were written down, he finds, okay, this Utnapishtim was given eternal life, by gods, because, he was the hero. So he goes onto an epic journey, and, it's much more advanced than that, but, there are plenty of different descriptions of that. He goes into this epic journey to find, again, just as a fountain of youth in many of myths and folklore, here it is about a plant of youth. And he gets it eventually, but at the end, he's just, he goes to sleep and he loses this plant. So, it's very tragic story, but, it has so many of, different threads to it. It's very, very advanced as, being the first story ever created probably by mankind, or at least the first written down, or at least the first for which we have evidence. And it's, it's about hominids, because Gilgamesh is also a little bit of a giant himself. He's 2/3 god, demigod to some extent. So there are plenty of different threads. I often say that ancient Mesopotamian, two sources, and these are the oldest one, the Gilgamesh and the Epics, are the basis of all of the conspiracy theories, even the New World Order, because in Epics, the elites want to destroy humanity because, they are too loud, there's too many of them, so overpopulation. Epics and Gilgamesh, being two of the oldest texts known to humanity, are the basis of most conspiracy theories.
Epics, you said? Epics? Epics. I've never... Okay. I think we have enough... If we do, we have enough time. Can we go into that?
Yeah, I think it's the best way to connect, Gilgamesh and Epics. Epics is like just a few hundred years later than the Gilgamesh, but we know very well by the details, because the Epics is also about the flood mainly, but not only, also about conspiracy theories, that, Epics is just a different language name for Utnapishtim and Jushudra before. And even sometimes, Jushudra Utnapishtim is within the Epics epic. So it's almost, the same flat story, but with a further context that, it starts with gods when there is no humanity yet. And gods, are very fed up of working on Earth because, they need to dig canals for, plants to grow, etc. And first they create like robots to some extent, like some creatures to work for them. And these are, I don't remember what they are called, but they call these robots. They are not enough. So they create out of clay humans. And again, Adumu, it's clay in these ancient Mesopotamian languages, just as Adam and Eve. So it's almost the same story. The same with the Eden. Eden is also mentioned, as this, paradise stuff before that. But here in Epics, it's not Eden and Eden paradise stuff, but they create, and it's similar to other stories from all over the world, like the Mayan ones, that there were previous humans before us. And that the gods first created them out of wood, but they were too fragile or something. Then they created it out of sand or something. And then the final version of humans was created out of mud. So the same in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And okay, they created this humanity, but they again haven't limited it, which may be allusion, again, to conspiracy theories like telomeres. We find telomeres that, if we had unlimited telomeres, if they weren't decaying, would be immortal. Our, body cells would be completely immortal. So the longer the telomeres in our DNA we have, the longer we live. So the first humans are like that they are not, aging, they can live forever. They can be killed, of course, because they are material flesh and blood human beings. And then, they start to overpopulate. There's overpopulation all over the world. They start to be very noisy because there's so many of them. These gods, these elites do not want them. They are shouting, they are noisy. We are fed up with them. So let's send a great deluge and destroy all of the humanity. But before that, they try plenty of different other scenarios like pandemic. Okay, let's give them this kind of sickness. People became sick, but humans. And it's also about ingenuity and inner strength of humanity that still, they can survive. And again, after the pandemic, they are still, getting more and more of humanity. Again, overpopulation. And there are so many in Atrahasis' description. It's, so detailed that, okay, then famine, and then other kinds, no water, etc. And finally, when it's, this famine, that parents are eating their own children, or let's say that person is eating a child of their neighbors or something. Such detailed descriptions of cannibalism, etc. But nothing can destroy humanity. It always prevails, and always, it's too much for the gods. So finally they say, okay, let's get this flood going on and we'll once and for all destroy humanity. But one of the gods, I don't remember if it's Enki or Ea, I think Enki says, okay, I want humanity to be there. So he rebels, he rebels from the gods and he goes to Atrahasis, but in his dream. Which also, I think, supports my own theory that these gods of ancient Sumerians were metaphysical beings, because he's not coming physically to Atrahasis. Atrahasis, you need to build an ark to save humanity. No, he's coming in dreams. And he gives Atrahasis this basic mantra: destroy your house, and from this, remnants of your house, build a boat. Destroy your house, build a boat. And he repeats it a few nights in a few dreams. So it also shows us that these gods weren't like some powerful creatures. Okay, I will materialize in front of Atrahasis and, I will order him to build a boat. No, they are like shadowy figures. They do not have so much power over humanity. Demons, maybe they are.
Is that a possibility because they couldn't, they weren't allowed to physically interfere? Maybe that they had an unwritten rule. They're not physically allowed to interfere. So then he's like, I know a way around this. I could save them by doing that. Yeah. But sorry, keep going on. Keep going on.
Yeah, I think it shows us that these are not like plenty of people say, oh, some ancient aliens of, physical kind, but I think they are more like demons or something like, from different cultures, I'm comparing demons or something. And, I think it's 2 or 3 nights of constant mantra. So it also shows us that this message wasn't strong, because if it was strong, he would once just appear in his dream and, Atrahasis would be okay, I'm building it. And after these mantras, finally Atrahasis says, okay, I will do that. And he, again, destroys his house of reed and builds a boat. There are also a few different examples in these stories that he takes, for instance, one person who is good at metallurgy, which may be similar to post-Diluvian from Bible and other apocryphic texts, post-Diluvian like sciences that, like this, even in the book of Enoch, this knowledge about the heavens, etc. There is also a bit of mention, like connection within Atrahasis. But okay, he builds a boat, there isn't much mention about, all the species, but he takes a few animals, he takes seeds of plants, which is very important. Also in Gilgamesh, it is there. He takes a few people with him, and then there is this flood. And then after flood, I think it's more in Gilgamesh about these birds, but in Atrahasis, it's that, okay, after the flood, it's ending. And what is interesting is that both in Gilgamesh and Atrahasis, these gods are, proud to some extent, because the rest of humanity is being completely destroyed. There's only Atrahasis with his people on his ark. And they said, okay, right now we will, if humanity is so, epic, so heroic, we will live it. Let it be there. But we won't do the same mistake again to there be an overpopulation or there will be too much noise. We will limit humanity, genetically, probably. They won't live much longer than that. There will be diseases, more diseases, not like just pandemics, but casual diseases all day long. There will be pain. And similar to the Garden of Eden, that humans will, need to work all day for just to survive. And this is how it ends. And Atrahasis is the last one, or Utnapishtim in some version, to be this immortal human being. That's why in the Epic of Gilgamesh is, traveling to Atrahasis to find the secret of immortality. And, this Atrahasis, Utnapishtim guy, this flood hero is, being somewhere at the edge of the world, in total isolation from the other people. And again, the civilization starts again, and it's even mentioned in some of other texts that, again, Apkallu, 7 sages are there, and they are not building the entire cities, but they are both teaching people basics of, humanity, but also they are building just foundations of the cities of Ur and Uruk. So I think it's a connection to the megalithic architecture all over the world that we mentioned, because in most places it's just the fundamentals. And then onto these huge megalithic polygonal walls, we have like just bricks or just, casual buildings that could be made very easily by primitive people. And, as I said, even foundations of castles here in Poland are being created from this polygonal megalithic walls. So I think it's another connection. So that's basically the story about, elites trying to destroy humanity, maybe, genetically modify them to not let them live, and be mortal. So I think it's the basics of all of the conspiracy. I say the conspiracy theories, I don't want to be negative, of course, about it, but I said that people say, oh, new conspiracy theory. No, it was already 4,000 years ago in the case of Atrahasis.
And that would be rewritten in like the Georgia Guidestones. The same thing, where they were supposed to keep the population under, I think it's like 500 million. That's what they want the population to be. And they talk about all that. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, don't worry. But I also connected right now. You said that, population needs to be like that. I think that both in the Bible and I don't remember, but in some Mesopotamian texts, also there is a mention that also humanity was limited by childbearing. And I think in the Genesis, it's even okay that you will, give birth with, pain, and it will be hard for us. And we know very well that for humans, it's very often harder to, give birth to children than other animals, which is easier for them. And we have less, of course, of our offspring in comparison to other even mammals. So I think it may be other connection to what you've said that, we'll keep population limited at that. And when it comes to, cyclicality about all of that later, and the same, because it's all about, we see mostly about the flood. All of these things are, around this main story of the Great Flood, Great Deluge, and kickstart of humanity and civilization. But again, at the beginning of our current era, the Gnostics started similarly. They started, with, for instance, Scythians, with interpretation of the biblical flood. Again, 2,000 years after Atrahasis, but 2,000 years before us. They were speculating that the Noah, it was their opinion that Noah was the bad one, and he, had a pact with the Demiurge, with the Yahweh, with the, Satan himself, and, that the Yahweh let Noah live and, be his, again, this is a bad story about, Israelites later and Jews, but, that they, Scythians believed that Noah was the bad guy, that, he signed a pact with the devil, and that the Noah was, led to be, his offspring, be the kings throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia. So his lineage after the flood will be ruling the world. But the Scythians believe that there survived other people, like that Scythians, their name came from Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, who also survived, and that their lineage was the right guys, the good guys. And, that the Noahs and all the other, we don't want to be anti-Semitic here, but what it implies, that these are the bad guys and the Scythians are the right guys. And again, they're interpreted, that it was the reset of some kinds of, bad entities who wanted to get rid of humanity, that there is a huge conspiracy throughout all of the millennia, that's why, the elites are ruling and people are, it's as I said in my title of my book, deja vu has everything already been. It's already been first in Epic and Gilgamesh 4,000 years ago, and then 2,000 years ago in halfway with the Gnostics like the Sethians.
Okay. There is so much to unpack here as well, and I like how you're tying it all together and throwing out possible ideas. Like, okay, there is this chance that, the Sethians are saying this. I do want to go back one last question here. I don't want to keep you too much longer. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, you mentioned a hominoid, a humanoid, sorry, or a hominoid, whatever that was covered in hair and that was strong. Is there a possibility that is in reference to like Bigfoot, Sasquatch kind of creature that they're actually talking about in this?
That's a great question, and I totally believe so, because my personal theory is that the Yeti, Bigfoot, I also take into possibility that these are some kind of non-physical beings that sometimes materialize. So I also take that into consideration. But my own theory about Bigfoot, Yeti throughout history is that just as we coexisted with other hominids, and just as this hominid is mentioned in Epic of Gilgamesh, that there were other just hominids, just as, let's say, we and Neanderthals. So maybe, the Bigfoot is also like Neanderthal, more hairy, more rigid, etc. So I totally believe that it may be, like Bigfoot and Yeti. There are also some legends, like legends when the Mongols were conquering, the whole world of their, times up until Europe, that they encountered, in the Central Asia, just similar primitive people. And interestingly, they could procreate with them. Humans could procreate with them. But, the offspring was crazy. And these were like monkeys. Like, again, it's Enkidu in Epic of Gilgamesh, this like hominid. I think this is, all the same thing, that it's like parallel species to humanity. We know very well that humans, procreated with Neanderthals. So again, Enkidu in Epic of Gilgamesh, Bigfoot, Yeti, maybe it's a different one, maybe the same one, and this mentioned. So I totally believe so.
So it could also be, like you said, it could be like this creature, this robot thing that we also made as well, like a homunculus, like a golem of sorts. It could be something along that line.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Alexander, I don't want to keep you any longer. This was pretty epic. I think it was it was deep. It was we went some places, and I want to say thank you so much. So if anybody is interested in your book or interested in contacting you, where can they do that?
I think the easiest way would be just copy and paste my name and surname, and wherever you can find me in English, you can, follow me and check out another podcasts on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and my book is Deja Vu, has everything already been. Again, you can find it just by putting my name and surname probably, and the English version is on Amazon, like US, Canada, Australia, UK, and a few more. So Deja Vu has everything already been. I try when I'm talking to you in other podcasts, I sometimes, make generalizations about some topics, but I try to, show every possible source. And I'm quoting in my book, like tons of not only scientists and scientific articles when it comes to decay of civilizations and catastrophes, but also, ancient texts, possible translations of them to modern languages. I try to show you that yes, this is being written down in this ancient text from thousands of years ago. So if you're interested, don't forget to check it out. Tons of knowledge connecting again, everything from decay of civilization, cataclysms, lost civilizations, ancient texts, even into spirituality, metaphysics, and cyclicality of the universe. So just copy and paste my name and surname, and you will find me on plenty of social media.
And I will definitely have that all in the show notes as well. So if anybody doesn't want to copy and paste, just go down below. You'll see it. Just click on it. Great. And we'll direct you accordingly. Alexander, I want to say thank you so much. This is great.
Epic.
Yeah, this was epic.
Epic.
Yeah. I think that's the best way to describe it. The only way we can describe
Thank you. Really enjoyed, and also your questions and everything that you connected with me. I always tell this, maybe that's bad always telling things, but through such conversations as are today, I'm making even more connections than before. So maybe some stuff that I've talked to you was like even novel when it comes to my own research, because, okay, you asked me these questions and yeah, it's connected with that. Or maybe, we're talking about particular topic and yes, it was connected. So I really, it's even good for me to have such conversations because, it expands, all of the stuff that I'm talking about even more. Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Epic. Just epic.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated it. All right, everyone. That was Alexander Cheskovich. I don't want to mess that up. But, we had him on before. And this time, I think we went a lot deeper. We went into some great topics. We went from, I was going to say Aztlan, but yeah, Aztlan, Atlantis, the flood, Sumerian, Epic of Gilgamesh. And I forget the name of the other one, but that's fine. The other one that comes after the Epic of Gilgamesh. I definitely want to dive a little more deeper into that, which it all ties into these conspiracies. Like you're saying, oh, this is a new conspiracy. No, these conspiracies have been around for thousands of years. This depopulation has been around for thousands of years. And of course, a lot of people just, oh no, that's not true. That's not true. They're not trying to depopulate us. Yeah, it's been written down for thousands of years. Come on, good people, give your head a shake. So wade through the shouters, wade through the bankers, listen to academics. And what are they saying? One of the main things is, well, we don't really know. We're going for what we have here, but we don't truly 100% know. And I think that is one of the most brilliant things that can be said. Science has never settled. We're trying to figure things out. And the ones who scream the loudest maybe aren't the right ones. Maybe they're not the ones you should be listening to. You should be listening to the ones that maybe are in the background saying, well, we don't know yet because we need more information. We need more study. That's the most brilliant thing that we can say. All right, everyone. Until next time, keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.
Beneath the stars where shadows grow, the Nephilim's echoes whisper low. Bigfoot roams through the forest deep, and Dogman prowls where the brave won't sleep. Across lost history we wonder why, seeking the truth that time tried to hide. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies. Aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks. In the void of secrets, a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the cold gas flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Streak through the velvet skies. Aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks. In the void of secrets, a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the cold gas flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Legends rise from the earth's deep core, a lost legacy we can't ignore. With every step, the veil grows thin, revealing worlds where the strange begins. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the cold